Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Shay Explores Daily, and today I've got another video. I'm back in London, and behind me you can see the famous HMS Belfast warship. Now this ship goes back to the World War II era. I'm gonna have a look around, see what's in there, and show you guys the history. If you like it, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Let's go inside and have a look. So guys, I just bought my ticket and it cost me about £25 I believe, but I did get a guidebook. So when you walk through this cool corridor, you'll see a bit of history of where this ship has served, and it's very cool. There's also a very convenient location as well, as it's right on the Thames, right next door to the famous Tower Bridge, and the other side you've got London Bridge as well. So for example, you've got San Francisco, California, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, you've got Singapore, and you've got all the years that this ship actually served in those places. So guys, the area that I'm standing in is called the Quarterdeck, and this is the rear end of the ship where all the church services were held basically. Obviously, as you know, soldiers that were in the Navy were obviously traveling many different places, and they couldn't obviously attend their church back home. This here is a tribute to Captain Morgan Giles, who was the last official operating captain of the ship between 1961 and 1962. It's important to remember as well, guys, that during the time that he was captain, so we're talking the early 1960s, Britain and the world was at threat of nuclear warfare. So this ship here was actually designed and adapted for nuclear warfare of that time. So here you've got a background of how it started, and as you can see, it was built for the Second World War. It served in the Home Fleet, in the Arctic convoys to Russia, who at that time was the Soviet Union, and even served in the D-Day landings. As you can see, after the Second World War, the ship took on a new role. It was essentially sent to Asia to help, obviously, Britain's Pacific Fleet. And then finally, in its final years, it was serving during the Cold War. And essentially it was sent obviously to Korea to help ensure peace in that part of the world. Behind me is a tribute to soldier Arthur Bailey, who was on the ship's fleet between 1948 and 1950, which was the Cold War period, I believe. He served on this ship, and this here is a tribute to him. So this plaque behind me celebrates the replanking of this quarterdeck. So I'm guessing that means that it was rebuilt in the 1980s. I think it was 1986, and on the plaque it's got the list of everyone who took part in that. So as you can see, this plaque here commemorates that. So this is the official bell of the ship basically. So I was told this was actually given to the people of Belfast in 1948, and then in the end in 1962 it was given back to the ship. Behind me is the passageway to the wardroom. So if you were to go down here, back in obviously when the ship was running, it was where soldiers used to wine and dine and spend their leisure time. Now lower rank soldiers were actually not allowed in here. They had to have special permission from their general or their superior basically, but down that hall would have been a feast of nice food and so on and so forth. Fun fact, you actually can hire out these rooms privately these days for a party or a function. As you walk through here, you can just get a kind of feel for what it was like. You see lots of tubes and pipes and stuff, and yeah, it's not the most fancy thing, but it is obviously was a warship. So guys, here you can see a list of various naval badges that soldiers could have got. So it starts originally from that way, and it works it all the way up to like a lieutenant level. So the ship was split into two different ranks. So officers, which are the gold ones, and then you've got ratings, which are the black and red ones. So the rankings depending on what you were essentially. And yeah, behind me would have been what was the regulating office, which is where soldiers got paid, were warded and so on basically. So it would have happened down there. So these are the toilets. They're called nighthead toilets, and these were only available to use during the quote-unquote silent hours, so basically during the night, as you can see. So behind me you've got what they call a torpedo flat, and that was used to fire up, I think, up to about 6 torpedoes at a time basically. So it was always stored here pretty much, and in the event of attack the ship would have the torpedoes ready due to this behind me. So behind me you've got the wooden workshop, and although HMS Belfast is a steel ship, it still had a room for wooden fittings and stuff, which they did their crafts and so on, etc. Now, in terms of how many people worked in the room at one time, I'm not sure the exact number, but I reckon there was at least 4 or 5 people working in there at the exact same time. So guys, behind me you've got the laundry room, which is obviously an important part of the ship. It's obviously where soldiers and stuff had their clothes washed. The really interesting thing about this is that the laundry room was actually manned by people from Hong Kong, basically. So they weren't part of the Royal Navy, but they were brought on this ship to essentially clean the clothes and so on and so forth. In here you've got the mail room, so obviously soldiers would get mail from their family and so on and so forth. And here is where it was all sorted, and as you can see on the right hand side, it's got various like the compartments, obviously I'm guessing for each soldier and so on and so forth. In here, as you can see, you've got a chapel, and as you can see the seats there with the pulpit up front, and obviously catered to people's prayers and religious and spiritual needs. And here is the sound reproduction equipment room. This is where they played music and so on and so forth to essentially boost the morale of soldiers on board, basically. It all happened from this room. What you have to remember, guys, is that these people, these Royal Navy soldiers, could have been away from home for weeks or months at a time. So essentially it was important to keep up morale, because especially if they were in the heat of battle or war, things like that, a prayer room or a room to play music, was a massive morale booster at a time where there was definitely uncertainty regarding the war, the Second World War, and so on and so forth. And here you've got like a 3D diagram of the ship and its various decks and layers. I'm guessing this is like some replica meat of what the soldiers would have been fed whilst on board. As you can see, there's a variety of meat here that I can see. And behind here you've got the library. The library is not actually open today, but you can see some replica of some books that the soldiers would have read obviously during their time on board. So guys, I've come into the kitchen and I've been told that the actual chefs had to feed about 1,000 sailors a week, 1,000. So there was a huge variety of food on display for the sailors. This included a variety of meats, rice, pasta, you name it, so on and so forth. So as you can see here, this is meant to be like some kind of pudding. I don't know what that meant to be. Shepherd's pie, pudding, I have no idea. This is meant to be like a replica of like some cake, as you can see here. And as you go down, you've got some chips. That looks like maybe some pie, cottage pie maybe. You've got some sausages, mini sausages. And as you go further down, same thing, to be honest. Sausages, chips, I don't know what that is. And then at the end you've got obviously mushy peas. It's important to note, guys, that you have to remember at any time the enemy could have attacked. So sometimes they could have been serving food and they'd have to drop their food, or the soldiers would have to drop dinner or whatever and go out and fight. So in here was always quite a high tense room, as you can see. Here you can get a rough idea of how big the pots were, essentially, that cook for everyone. So you've got one here, and you've got one here as well, and you can imagine how big they are, and they're also very deep as well. So it basically batched up huge amounts of foods all at the same time. And here you've got like some potatoes, some replica potatoes as well. So behind me you've got a deck room, and that is where the senior lieutenants or some soldiers used to sleep. And in there they've got the beds in like bunk bed piles, so people slept on top of each other, next to each other. And in there also they've got lockers as well. So you can see that although they were serving, it wasn't the most comfortable situation for the living arrangements, but they did it because they loved their country. In here you've got the dental surgery. So this place is obviously self-explanatory. The actual dentist was given the nickname Toothy, basically. So guys, behind me is the sick room, and that room needs no introduction. It's where soldiers were treated, and some of them sadly died. In there, it's got a variety of things, including an X-ray room, and also it's got stretchers to lift people up and down the various decks. In there as well, something that you'll notice as well, there is a presentation about the history of obviously the ship. But yes, that is the sick room. So this was known as the Nafi canteen. And in here they sold anything from magazines to razor blades to chocolates and also cigarettes. So guys, I'm standing in what they call the mess decks, and I was told that these rooms were made for warmer climates, such as in parts of Asia and so on and so forth. So as you know, the ship traveled around the world, and as it went to warmer climates, the ship's conditions obviously wasn't suited for it, because obviously the UK and Europe is more of a colder part of the world than other regions. So I was told in here it can get very busy and very, very messy. In here you'll see little notes about various locations around the world, places like Hong Kong, where a lot of sailors like to have their downtime and so on and so forth. But yes, in here it's got a lot of benches, and in here was full of activity and also very, very busy. So you can see there some hammocks where people used to sleep. I think that's a hammock, I might be wrong, please forgive me. So guys, I've come to the upper deck, and behind me you've got the turrets. So the turrets is like a bit inside of the guns. When it was wartime, 6 soldiers used to sleep in there, and it was manned, I think, up to around, I think, 20 people at a time or something like that. 24 people, I can't remember. When it was time for war, they would be in the turrets and fire the gun from there. And these guns have a range of, I think, about 24 miles, I was told. So very, very interesting and very cool. So guys, as you can see, I'm standing here on the forecourt of HMS Belfast. It was from here that everything was seen. Everything ahead was seen from here. And one of the most famous battles, which was coordinated from this spot, was the Battle of Cape Horn, I think it was, in Norway in 1943. Normally as well, from here the captain would have a bird's eye view from his office, and he could see right ahead. And during that battle, the water was very, very icy and stuff, and the Arctic convoy from HMS Belfast had to help supplies get to the Soviet Union, and also watch out for German attacks as well. Here you've got a cafe on board the ship. I was told that where this cafe now stands is where the aircraft hangars used to be. So this is the radio frequency room. It's where ships would send various radio signals to communicate with each other whilst they were out at sea. And here is the battery repair shop, where the ship's emergency lights were essentially, if they went out, the battery would be replaced in this room here. So guys, this room needs no introduction. I am in the Admirals Head, which is basically the captain's room. And as I mentioned before, you've got a bird's eye view of straight ahead. It was obviously from this room that everything was obviously commanded regarding coordinates as to where the ship was, how close they were to land, what was the nearest ship, and so on and so forth. It's important to know as well that essentially from this room, obviously you could also stare at the ship as well. I also forgot to mention that 9 times out of 10 the ship always carried an admiral. So there'd be a captain in this room, but the admiral will sit in the seat and direct things and so on and so forth. So this is the electronic warfare office, and it was in here where the equipment was used to intercept like sort of important information regarding the enemy and sort of their plans. So they would use this room to try and intercept any oncoming attacks. So as you can see here, you get an idea of what the room was like. Lots of old school sort of, they're not computers obviously, but they're old school sort of like databases where they would sit down and essentially try and intercept enemy combatant information. So guys, I'm standing here on the flag deck, and what this area was is essentially it was a lookout point, and essentially any information or any intelligence that was given from the rooms below would get sent up here, and they will prepare for any incoming enemy attacks. So as you can see from up here, you've got a very, very good view. You're very, very high up. You're actually higher up than the admiral. So this was like a lookout point for any enemy combatants that will come in. So all this here is a gun direction platform, and it's quite self-explanatory. It's where on a clear day the guns barrels and the guns obviously ammo would be obviously directed from. Behind me, right behind me there, you've got the director control room, and in that room the highest point is essentially where the crew would work out the range, etc., of firing the guns and so on. So that's what that room is for. Here you've got a telephone with some instructions, and from here the actual person who stood here would call down below and essentially direct them as to sort of what to do and what not to do regarding obviously firing the guns. So turns out I was actually wrong. This is the navigating office, and this seat that I'm sitting in is exactly where the captain sits. I'm getting a little bit confused with all these various desks. There's one for the admiral, one for the captain, and so on and so forth, but this is where the captain sits, and still he has a great view. But in this area here, you've got things like running speed, range, so much things going on inside this room here. So I read that originally, so I am correct, so the ship was controlled by from this room, but originally this room was actually upstairs. It was further above, and then after a period of time it got moved down here, but everything is controlled from this exact room here. So here we've got an operating room, and here you can see like various coordinates. So obviously the ship would have been here, then you've got various coordinates in terms of clockwise, anti-clockwise, and in this room, which is very, very high tech, you can see a lot of compasses and so on and so forth. So behind me you've got the admiral and captain sea cabins, and these rooms were used by them to obviously rest, relax, and so on and so forth. For obvious reasons they're a lot more private, but this section here was used for that. And here you've got some officers' cabins. I was told the ship would carry as many as 78 officers during her active service life. So I've come through to the lower deck, and this is a soup and tobacco store. So essentially they would sell like teas and stuff, etc. in here. Now down here is the lower steering deck, and down here you could steer the ship as well from down here. So it's actually named after this guy called Len Bryce. It's named after him, and apparently he was very, very good at steering the ship from down here. So here you have a diagram of how the ship was steered. So you've got obviously the bridge which we were in, and then we've got here where we are now, the lower steering position. Then obviously you've got the hydraulic cables, and then the rudder and propellers which turns and pushes the ship. So all of those compartments work together to make the ship work. But most importantly, here and here is essentially where obviously it was all commanded from. That is it, guys, for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know where I should go next. I've got many, many, many more cool videos coming very, very soon. In the meantime, thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.